all your girlfriends over here. Come on, girls. Come on. You know better than to run from me, Flo.
Lieutenant, I was just...
It was just bullshit. All right, who we got here? We got Min, Sherry, Lola, Carrie, Sue Ellen. Oh, that star stays screaming cocksucking. Sylvester, right?
My name's Sophia.
Sophia, huh? Now, what's this, Sophia? Ah, yeah. Now, this feels like little balls of cock on a Kotex, right, Sophia? Don't you come in my hand, you cocksucker, or I'll rip it off.
Oh, Jesus, Lieutenant, you're hurting me.
Not as bad as I'm going to. Now, what's your name? What's your name?
Sophia.
Yeah.
Ow!
What's your name?
Sylvester.
I'm looking for Roger Montalvo. I mean, I'm really looking. So whoever lets me know, I owe him one, okay?
Oh, you got it, Lieutenant. Anything else?
Oh, Flo, now, if I wanted anything else, I'd call Sylvester here. I mean, look at this mouth. I mean, this is an experienced mouth. Right, Sylvester?
Please, Lieutenant.
Now, listen, cocksucker. Montalvo's boyfriend. What's his name?
Jose Malpica.
That's right, Jose Malpica. Now, listen, you run in the same circles. You run into him on a daisy chain. You tell him I want to see him. Comprende?
Yeah. Yeah.
Get back to work. Get back to work.
I heard. Got the word.
You are listening to TMBDOS. They must be destroyed on sight. The following podcast may contain adult language and discussions of an adult nature. Spoilers for the films discussed occur often. You have been warned. Now, take it away, Dr. Rausch.
They must be destroyed on sight.
All right, welcome back. It is They Must Be Destroyed on Sight, episode 205. And I'm your host, Lee. Racial epithets are not permitted, Russell. And I'm
in this movie, they definitely are.
And I'm joined by my co-host, Daniel. You fuck with me, better you piss a kidney stone through your hard-on Harper. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing okay. I'm not passing a kidney stone through my hard on.
That's good.
Which is to say I don't have a hard on, just I'm not currently passing a kidney stone through one. I really only do that every 3 to 4 weeks. So I think that's pretty average. I've not Googled that. Please Google that for me and tell me if that's normal.
Yeah. And we got an interesting...
Let me know in the comments. Yeah.
Yeah. And we got an interesting one this week. We did not plan this. This is sort of, we did plan to do this movie, but it was not because of what all of a sudden
it's not.
happened.
It's not. We planned, let's do a little movie about, the police in the early 90s, racism and corrupt cops. And then the world exploded on us. So, plans sometimes change and sometimes they stay the same.
Yeah, I'd say a very prescient pick it ended up being anyway. We are going to be looking at Q&A from 1990. And yeah, I think we'll have some things to say about this movie and what's going on right now. Just maybe. Before we do that, we do have some housekeeping to do, so I'm going to get into the comments. And it's all YouTube comments this time out. So this is
it's going to be great. I'm excited. I can't wait.
So do you want the bad or do you want the good first?
It surprised me.
Okay, we're going to go to the bad first.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Someone on our episode on the Fun Host named Oliver F. started off...
Oliver Fuckboy. I'm just going to say Oliver Fuckboy.
Started by posting a bunch of question marks. Big string of them.
Was it 1488 question marks? Because,
No. And so I replied, what's the confusion? And he replied back, this video, I thought it was something related to the movie The Funhouse, 1981, but I see no coherent imagery on this subject. And I replied, it is related to The Funhouse. It happens to be a podcast about said film. And his reply to that was, excuse my ignorance, what's a podcast? And I didn't follow up after that.
You have made contact with a time traveler from 2002, my friend. That's the only explanation.
Someone somehow went down the wrong hole in AOL and came out in 2020. Yeah. Someone named Arjuna Vijaya on our episode on the Rundown, a very popular one for these sort of comments.
Right.
His first comment was
a recent film which people would want to be searching for clips or the full movie, etc. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. He says, "What the fuck?" And I said, "What's the issue?" And he asked, "Where's the movie?" And I replied,
"Netflix. That's where the movie is."
Yeah,
Amazon Prime, $4. I promise you, it's fine.
And I replied, why do you think this is a place to find the movie? Go buy or rent it. And his reply to that was junk. And my reply to that was junk attitude from you, dummy. Go pirate movies somewhere else. This is a podcast about the movie. A fact that anyone with a working knowledge of English can grasp if they take the time to read the description. So there you go.
I get the sense that you've been really bored not doing an episode with me last week and are just arguing with people in our YouTube comments at this point.
You're not far off.
Yeah, fair enough. You're going a bit stir crazy up there in Canada. I get it. It's fine. I feel.
I'm watching like the potential apocalypse happen down south, so it's a little.
I don't know anything about that.
No.
Hold on. Down south, Canada. Oh, right. That's us. Yeah.
Yeah. Mexico, right?
Yeah.
Now we have some positive ones. This is from Peter Theobald. First commented on our Posse from Hell episode. He says, as a Western fan of some 60 years, I'd like to say how much fun I find your reviews. This is one that escaped me, as this is pre-Peck and Paw period. May I suggest the work of Bud Bodeker for future consideration? I think I pronounced that last name correctly. From what I could see, he did a lot of movies with Randolph Scott, a bunch of early 50s Westerns, and some of them look pretty good. Like they look like, they're better than just dumb singing cowboy romance Westerns or whatever, right? So
really what I've gathered from, watching Westerns and seeing people comment on our conversations about Westerns and just kind of, is that we could do a whole podcast just about Westerns. In fact, we could do a whole podcast just about Westerns from like 1939 to 1960 and have a perfectly fine time just discussing, I wish there were as many Western podcasts as there were horror movie podcasts ultimately.
Yeah, it would be nice, wouldn't it? He also commented on our Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid episode, and he says, that's amazing. I have 3 Westerns at the top of my best of list, this and Once Upon a Time in the West. Saw it in 1973 on its theatrical release in the UK and countless times over the last 50 years approximately. You boys have nailed the whole concept completely. Thanks. And there you go.
Oh, you're awesome.
Welcome. Yeah.
The check is in the mail.
Yeah. But no, thank you, Peter. Glad you're enjoying our episodes that you're finding. Although I haven't put any new episodes on YouTube for the longest while now, like the last 3 or 4 weeks. Basically, because my computer is like failing on me right now, and I have to fucking fix it. But until then, yeah,
well,
I'll get back on that shit. But yeah, we can move on to what we've watched in the last little while. I'm not going to really mention anything this time out, so I'll throw it over to you, Daniel.
Sure. I mean, I had I spent some time away from Twitter, away from dealing with the world, and watched fairly okay television show on Netflix. I watched the show Space Force, which is the new Steve Carell show. It's produced by Greg Daniels. Greg Daniels, if you don't know, was sort of like the second in command of King of the Hill, kind of co-creator of The Office, and then Parks and Recreation. These are all shows that I love, that I have deep, deep problems with in terms of the way, you know, like there's a really complicated relationship I have with Greg Daniels' work, but these are all like really amazing television shows. And then he reunited with Steve Carell to do this show Space Force, and it's half genius and half garbage, and you never know what you're going to get in any given time with it. It does feel like, you know, they're used to kind of doing like kind of full-fledged like 24 episode seasons, and then they got 10 episodes and then just kind of like hit the high points in terms of like designing a plot, because huge developments happen just completely off screen in terms of this. It also just kind of feels slightly undercooked as a concept. It seems like they kind of said like, oh, Trump is decided to do like the Space Force thing. Oh, we're going to do a comedy show about that. And then it just kind of rushed into production, and they didn't spend, because typically shows like this, they'll spend a year just kind of developing the concept, kind of figuring out like how to do it. It is exceedingly well produced. I mean, it looks amazing. I mean, you could sit down and, I mean, they kind of designed it to be like, well, what if it looked like a Marvel movie, but it was like paced as a sitcom, and they pretty much nailed that. And the other big problem is that Steve Carell. I love Steve Carell. I've loved him since, you know, the Daily Show era. So, you know, like since like the late 90s, I've been a Steve Carell fan. I'm not going to say he's miscast here as much as like they haven't figured out what his character is. Because he's simultaneously supposed to be this kind of like, in a way, he's sort of like Arnold Rimmer, if Arnold Rimmer just kept getting promoted above his station for, you know, 25 years, and then ends up being like a 4-star general in charge of like the Space Force. And so like he's simultaneously this like kind of giant prick who is insulting to everyone around him. He's a person who, you know, believes wholeheartedly in the mission of the U.S. military. Yeah. Why don't we just bomb things? But also he's supposed to be this like heart of gold kind of center of the show. And in the other shows, like Michael Scott from The Office kind of gets this kind of similar treatment, where he is kind of this like mix of characteristics, but it is like kind of written well enough that it makes sense of like, you get a sense of like who Michael Scott is. And then Leslie Knope kind of has a similar dynamic in Parks and Rec, although she is portrayed, at least on a surface level, as a much more positive character. Although when you take a step backwards and understand what she's actually doing, she's, if anything, much, much worse than any villain in a Marvel movie. Yeah, I feel like it is just kind of like it would be. I feel like this show is undercooked. I feel this show is kind of underdone. It's not a bad show. It was really amusing. I enjoyed all 10 episodes to some degree or the other. There were a couple of them that I really, the second episode in particular, I was just kind of like really not on board with. I think it just kind of goes somewhere that I'm just not comfortable with a show like this going. But I enjoyed it. It's cute. It's funny. It's worth a watch. But yeah, it's kind of, it is the thing that it is. And if it gets picked up for a second season, it does end on a cliffhanger. So, you know, we'll see. But if it gets picked up for a second season, I hope that they really kind of make the decision to retool and kind of figure out what they're doing. The real key to the enjoyment of the show is that Steve Carell, just ignore him. Everyone around him is pretty amazing. Most particularly John Malkovich as the sort of scientific guy who's sort of the co-lead to Steve Carell's like general character. Even when he has shitty material, he sells it for everything he's worth, and he's really fucking good in this. So check that out.
Nice. All right. So we're going to take a quick break. We're going to play a little bit of music, some podcast promos, and we're going to come back and talk about Q&A from 1990.
You ungodly warlock.
New movie reviews all the time. See if these films age just like a fine wine.
Oh no, we'll jack it up again.
TV, games, and more within.
Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb are all the rage, but we'll lock those critics up in one cage.
The Jacked Up Review Show, every Wednesday evening on Spotify, Podbean, Anchor, and other available podcast apps.
How about throwing a little beach party for yourself and letting these people to get to know you oh so better?
Hey kids, it's me, your good friend Alistair, here to tell you about a wonderful movie podcast called Get Soft with Dr. Snuggles. What happens is, every 2 weeks, the love of my life, Siobhan, and I are joined by a cast of friends, family, internet weirdos, and special guests to guide you through the wild and woolly world of erotic thrillers and softcore films. Everything from alien abduction, intimate secrets, to Zarita, Passion's Avenger, and all points in between. Check it out now on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
What's that horrid man talking about?
You ungodly warlock.
Tiptoe through the window, by the window, that is where I'll be. Come tiptoe through the tulips with me. Oh, tiptoe from the garden, by the garden, on the willow tree, and tiptoe through the tulips with me.
Okay, Q&A from 1990.
Set up. Okay, calm down. We wait right here.
Q&A. Your first case as an assistant district attorney began with my phone call at 3:05 a.m.
Tell us in your own words, tell us what happened.
I saw him reach. I saw a flash of metal. Guy was with me. I hit him in the head.
So I go outside, and now the big guy, he pulled his badge, and he said, hey, nobody moves.
You got a right to remain silent as long as you can stay on the pen.
Give me a Q&A on this. There's no statute of limitations on murder.
I'm gonna bury your boy, Brennan, but legally, I got my proof. So I break a couple of heads.
I mean, you lose control of this jungle, you're finished.
Well, it gets rough sometimes. If you take shortcuts, they've never hurt us in court.
Just suppose Brennan comes up wrong.
Judges and Jew lawyers and the Kenny DAs are raking it in. You take a freaking hamburger and it's goodbye badge, gun, and pension.
You dirty? You're going.
You can always find somebody to set you up, right?
Not if you're clean.
Get out! Get out right now!
Q&A. Nick Nolte, Timothy Hutton, Armand Asante. A film by Sidney Lumet. Q&A.
Directed by Sidney Lumet, written by Edwin Torres, Sidney Lumet, and Alan Smithy. That I believe Sidney Lumet had his name taken off this for, I think, like one of the cuts of this or something like that. That's why that appears there. Yeah, the television.
It does feel like there's a bit of a tortured production process behind this. But please continue.
Yeah. So it's starring Nick Nolte as Mike Brennan, Timothy Hutton as Al Riley, Armand Asante as Bobby Texador, Patrick O'Neill as Kevin Quinn, Lee Richardson as Leo Blumenfeld, Louise Guzman here as Louise Valentin, Charles S. Dutton as Sam Chapman, Ginny Lumet as Nancy Bosch, Paul Calderon as Roger Montalvo, International Crisis as Jose Malpica, Dominic Chianes as Larry Pesh, looking like a fucking Larry Sanders in this. There's a couple of people who would go on to be in The Sopranos in this one. There's him, the guy who plays Big Pussy. I saw him as an extra in a bar in this film.
Vaguely racist Italian people showing
Yes.
up in The Sopranos 10 years later. Imagine my shock.
Leonardo Cimino as Nick Petrone, and Fivish Finkel as Preston Pearlstein. They gave Fivish Finkel the elaborate name Preston Pearlstein as well. That's great. I like that.
I just imagine like 3 parentheses around like half of these names. Oh my god!
It is.
Yeah.
So the synopsis I picked from Keith Lowe from IMDb says a young district attorney seeking to prove a case against a corrupt police detective encounters a former lover and her new protector, a crime boss who refuses to help him in his gritty crime drama.
Yeah, that's not really a description of the movie, but it's fine.
Yeah, like that kind of happens in this, but there's a lot.
All of those things
around.
happen, but not really what's really happening in the movie. But
I'm assuming this is like a first time watch for both of us. Is it?
I saw this. This was one that. So can I do the brief aside of like why I really wanted to do this?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you don't remember this era, but like we had HBO in my family when I was like 10 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And you used to get like the little like glossy like mini magazine every month of all the like movies that were coming out, and so you get the kind of glossy thing and you flip through it and read about all the movies, and then it had like a little like guide of like what time all the movies are going to be on at the end.
Mm-hmm.
It was like a kind of mini TV guide, sort of a glossy and fancy and everything, and you got that probably being an HBO subscriber back in the late 80s and early 90s. So I have like the sense memory of the first of the month showing up and then the big guide, and I used to like go over them. And I remember this movie as being like high in my mind is because it was advertised very strongly at whatever month that showed up on HBO in my childhood, right? But I never watched it until years later, right? And so I did watch this. I went through a period of the like back when Netflix was doing the sort of like when the disc model was the thing around 2007. I was like watching like 5 Netflix DVDs a week just by watching a movie every day and just plugging it back in, just right back into the mail, get the new one, and as fast as I can watch them, I just like send them back. And so I watched a ton of movies, and I watched it at the time, and some of this movie made like a strong impression of me, and other parts made a less strong impression of me. Mm-hmm. And then when I rewatched it, I was like, oh, that's why it made a less strong impression on me. But in particular, Nick Nolte's performance, and in particular, sort of the race relation stuff. And I was like, this seems like something that we should cover on this show. And that was kind of my only really thought when I was like, oh, I would like to do this. Is like it. Parts of this, in particular, Nolte's performance, meant something. It kind of seemed interesting, something that you and I should talk about. And rewatching it, I'm like, this is very 70s crime drama, but 15 years later.
Yeah.
There's a strong kind of component of that, which I think you and I probably both appreciated that element of it. But the rest of it is filled with a giant pile of shit, basically. That said, the stuff that works really works. The stuff that really doesn't. I do love Sidney Lumet as a filmmaker. 12 Angry Men is probably a top 10 film for me. I deeply, deeply adore that film. And the best parts of this film kind of reach that level of cinema. I think he was a working director. He made a shitload of movies. Went through a bunch of shit, and it does feel like that some of the problems of the film are just the kind of late 80s, early 90s kind of like this is just what you had to do in order to make the kind of gritty crime drama element to this, like in particular the love story. the love story it doesn't work. It goes nowhere. It's more, the film is more racist by having that the subplot than it would be otherwise.
Where it spends half the movie trying to apologize for Timothy Hutton looking at her black father the wrong way, like 5 years ago.
And so, like, the narrative here is that, like, he used to date this girl for, I think, like 2 years, if I don't remember the detail.
Something like that.
Yeah, something like that. And so he was with this girl for 2 years. And at some point, he was finally invited to go meet her father. And then he realizes her father is black. And she looks at his face, and then she immediately kind of breaks up with him because he has the wrong reaction to that. And so Timothy Hutton is racist, despite the fact that he's like kind of combating racism in his kind of position as a DA, et cetera, et cetera. And like, isn't this like a complicated look at race relations in New York City? And the answer is like, no, because you've been dating for 2 years and you just now invited me to meet your father. I could just have been surprised that he was black or, whatever. This isn't like, it doesn't really work as narrative conceit.
No.
And the whole reason that we're even introduced to this character is that she's now dating this guy, Armand Asante's Bobby Tech's character, who's, this like kind of high-end criminal. I mean, I don't know, like my feeling, and I really want to get your feeling on this, but I want to kind of just get my general thoughts out here very quickly. My feeling is that like the kind of the idea of like, we're going to kind of go through the process of this kind of Q&A process of looking at an investigation of a man who turns out to be a dirty cop, Nick Nolte's character, who commits some murder under the auspices of his office, and essentially he just expects it to be covered up, and it is covered up in the film. And this kind of process of Timothy Hutton as the ADA, and then like kind of the cops around him kind of having to come to terms with like, how do we deal with that? And the first like hour of the film is very much like focused on that. Like you kind of get we're having interviews, we're kind of talking to witnesses, we're kind of doing this, we're doing that, we're following that story. And then we kind of go off in like La La Land of like, intimidation of witnesses, and we enter like kind of some drag clubs, we enter some other stuff, and all this is interesting in and of itself, but it's less interesting than the sort of like mainline story that kind of the title Q&A would imply. And it just kind of becomes like, we're going to kind of do this thing, but it never really kind of becomes pulpy and fun enough to sort of justify its existence on its own. And so the film just kind of loses its way. And so suddenly we end up we're in Miami or whatever on a yacht, and suddenly people are killing each other. And these are characters that we don't necessarily care about. And then the love interest kind of appears and disappears. And then she comes up again at the end, and the like police corruption stuff, and so the political angling around this I think is really interesting. But all the stuff that involves kind of the Armand Asante character that isn't kind of directly like plot related just kind of goes nowhere. And this film is like 2 hours and 12 minutes long. It could very easily be like a tight hour 35, hour 40,
right.
And really kind of focus in on like that kind of material. And I hate kind of the criticism of it's just too long, it's got too much stuff in it. But ultimately the problem is that it kind of leads us off into this kind of like plot netherworld where I'm not quite sure. Like, I watched this twice because we delayed this for a week. So I watched it last week and then I rewatched it this week, and I am still not completely sure exactly what's going on in any given moment. Like, this was one where if I'd cared enough, I would have done the big sleep treatment and like written down all the plot elements and like figured out exactly kind of what's going on and what the interrelations are between them. But ultimately I don't care because there's just not much happening here. And I don't know, apparently there was a novel. It would be interesting to read the novel and see kind of what that is, because the novel was written in the 70s and it does kind of fit within that kind of 70s like crime drama kind of milieu. And it does feel like maybe this was, maybe it's just 15 years too late to really kind of fit into that. And then now suddenly has to be this kind of like Oscar caliber film with like this, but like a grittier version of this, something that kind of fits more into the like, the Serpico kind of, 7-Ups kind of drama might make more sense. So anyway, sorry, I've been talking too long. Please say what you can say.
I pretty much fall in line with what you're saying here. It is way too long for what's in here. Like it feels like it gets about to the hour mark, and then it becomes a different movie for a lot of the running time afterwards. Like, and I don't necessarily have a problem with that different movie. I just don't want it stacked up against the initial premise of the Q&A and working within that sort of idea. But it goes off, and I think you're right. It is kind of a victim of coming out of the 80s into the 90s. It feels like an R-rated episode of Miami Vice. It is what it kind of turns into for me. And
yeah. For that, like, 40 minutes there in that kind of mid to late period before.
Yeah.
And the rest of the film is like an R-rated version of Law and Order. And so you've got like an episode of Miami Vice just inserted wholesale into like an episode of Law and Order, which is kind of
and much like Miami Vice, if you watch that show, what kind of keeps you watching is actually the performances. Like it's the Don Johnson performance, and so you got that kind of same dynamic here with Nick Nolte, who's just like every scene he's in, he's ripping it apart. Like he's just and
he doesn't just chew the scenery. He chews the scenery, spits it out like a mama bird into the other actors' mouths, and then re-chews it for them when they're done. Like that's how much he chews the scenery. This is not a criticism. He's amazing in the film.
No, he is kind of like a mama bird to them all too, because I don't know if it's written in the character or if it was a choice he made, but he does like it's implied. It's implied that maybe it's more implied. Maybe I didn't pick up on this enough, but it's perhaps more than implied that he's a closeted homosexual who's self-loathing. I think.
I think it's pretty clear.
Okay.
It's pretty clear. Yeah.
And so he does like a lot. Like he gets in a lot of male characters' faces, like really close, and like touches their face and stuff while he's intimidating them and shit. Wow, brave performance at this point. And I was going to say he's not chewing the scenery and spitting it out. He's chewing the scenery and actively gaining weight as he's doing it, because he plays, a slightly overweight cop in this. And
yet he still seems like as good as he is. And I don't know. It does feel like this is like par for the course for him. Like I feel like Nick Nolte is the actor that everybody like thinks that Nicolas Cage is, because people do kind of give Nicolas Cage like a lot of deserved shit. I'm not going to disagree, but he also gets a lot of undeserved shit for being like this, like famously terrible, like scenery chewing actor. Right.
Yeah.
And like in his worst performances, sure. But in his really phenomenal performances, like Nick Cage is amazing. Right.
Yeah.
Nick Nolte is convincing in this film, despite the fact that this is like no person you have ever or will ever meet in your life. This is a straight up pulp character. And the thing is that like he's so much bigger than the rest of the film that the film suffers for it. And this is where I think like, that kind of like 70s exploitation vibe might have actually, like if it had pushed a little bit further in terms of like really kind of making these characters, the characters around him a little bit larger than life, it would have, kind of heightened the reality of the film, because as it is, like when he's not on screen, you're kind of like, what am I looking at? Armand Assante is completely lost in this film. Like he's fine. He's a good actor. I like Armand Assante. I think some of the dialogue he's given there's some deep level, like implicit racism. The film is trying to explore sort of like racist cops in New York City in the 70s/90s or kind of whatever. The film is trying to kind of do this thing, and really what it does is it just like throws a lot of slurs in your face for a long time.
Oh my!
It spends a lot of time. There's a lot of this. It wasn't like my memory of the film was actually like it was worse than the film actually is, if that makes sense. But I also spend like the bulk of my life now following racist shitheads on the internet, so like maybe I have a greater sensitivity to it. But I was definitely on the like, oh yeah, this isn't like doing the racism as a way of describing the racism. This is kind of just being a little bit racist. And I don't even really kind of, again, I don't like blame Lumet, and I don't blame the filmmakers for kind of doing this. They're trying to do the gritty realism thing, but but the way they do that is like they give the Hispanic drug lord from Cuba, they give him like, the very like stereotypical facial hair and the like wet back hair, excuse me for, you know, that. And they give him like the, you know, the phraseology that just like, you know, they do the most stereotypical racist things possible with these characters. And that's like, you know,
give him kind of a Scarface light in this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and Louis Guzman, like, Louis Guzman is an actor whom I love. I think he's amazing. I heart Louis Guzman. He's not good in this film. He's just not. And I think that they kind of gave him this kind of very generic, stereotypical kind of racist role. This is very early in his career. Is this his first film or one of his first films?
One of his first, I think, yeah.
But he's wooden here. Like, he's just not, like, he's kind of just reacting to Nick Nolte like he doesn't know what to do. And I think that there's a, you know, as good as Louis Guzman usually is, and as good as we know he can be, even with sort of like piss poor material, and this material is not like, the material they gave him is not bad. I think that it does speak to a certain level of discomfort with the production crew with like how to kind of deal with this material. Like, they didn't really know how to direct it. They didn't really know how to produce this in a way that would be effective, because like there's a pivotal scene in which Nick Nolte is intimidating Louis Guzman and sort of like, you know, saying like, yeah, all cops are dirty. No, man, I'm clean. You know, and Louis Guzman is just kind of standing there like almost with a stick up his ass and like a rod down his back. Like, he doesn't really know what to do in the scene. And that strikes me as the mark of an actor who's really doing his best, but he really hasn't been given like effective direction, you know. And I say that because Louis Guzman is so effortlessly loose in so many other films, even films that are worse than this one, you know. And so I feel like Louis Guzman's bad performance doesn't reflect on Louis Guzman as much as it reflects on the production itself.
Yeah, the movie tries to at least hint at like, oh, we're gonna get deep into the, you know, sort of institutionalized racism of the police department. You know, we're going to start with, you know, from the top up with the white cops being the power structure, and then you got the white detectives, and then
no, it's the Irish cops.
Yeah,
that's Irish detectives. Everyone has like not just a race but an ethnicity here, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and they're constantly throwing like slurs back and forth to each other in this kind of like fun and jokey way, right?
It's,
you know,
the barbershop scene in Gran Torino is kind of what it is, right?
Yeah. Imagine that for 2 hours and 12 minutes, and that's
exactly that's what I was thinking. It's like, yeah, Clint Eastwood put that in Gran Torino. He put it in for like 5 minutes at the most, and here it's like the entire film is that shit. And maybe
Charles S. Dutton is there calling Louis Guzman like honey dripper. You know, and then like, you know, Louis Guzman is like, well, you got to eat all that watermelon there to Charles S. Dutton, and it's just kind of like
calls him like knife fighter and shit like that.
What are we doing? Like, what is this supposed to be? You know?
I guess like maybe I'm giving the movie too much credit. Like, it feels like they're trying to maybe comment on like this sort of fraternity of cops element where even like the minorities, they know it's bullshit, but they have to, you know, that excuse, you know. They have to work within the system to keep their job and stuff like that, and they, you know, and they enable the white Irish cops to keep this power structure going because they're kind of bullied into it and shit. But the movie never
goes there. It can't do that. It can't really, like, it's just part of kind of that like background noise, and the fact that we spend so much time on it. Like, if it was just kind of one or two exchanges, you could sort of like, and partly that's you know, we're looking at it from a 30 years later perspective where, you know, kind of where we expect these films to have a little bit more sophistication, and like, you know, I'm willing to let it be a film of its moment, like, ultimately, and kind of like, you know, criticize it from the 2020 perspective and not necessarily kind of, you know, think of this as like, oh, this was clearly wrong at the time, because I think it's leaning into this kind of like, we're trying for this kind of gritty realism where this is how people talk, except it just feels so manufactured and artificial for much of its runtime. And it is like deeply unpleasant to watch for big chunks of it. Yeah.
The most unpleasant scene was, for me personally, was where Nolte interrogates a group of hookers, and there's the there's the trans hooker that he basically just
cross-dresser trans. I mean,
whatever. Yeah,
the film isn't interested in that, you know, distinction, and so we can't be either. You know, but you know,
although
there's
there's
someone who's like
there's like three
someone who calls themselves Sophia.
Yeah.
Although like the birth name was Sylvester or something.
Yeah, and he bullies her into, saying, "Oh no, it's Sylvester" or whatever. But no, there are three prominent cross-dressing characters in this.
There's a lot of, and again, like in 1990, having this much sort of like quote unquote gay content would have been seen as incredibly progressive, and in fact, like breaking, barriers and doing all that thing. And I think that's just kind of the question of like, yes, you can do this and you can kind of bring out this kind of problematic, material, and you can sort of break through that and do what at the time probably felt like the right thing. But if you're not in communication with people of that community,
right,
and you're not really interested in telling that story properly, it's just going to come across as terrible.
That's the thing. All the characters, like, even if they think they're being like super progressive with them, all these characters are just side characters, and they're all just kind of stereotypes. You can have a movie full of stereotypes, but you got to interrogate it. You can't just have them. If you're going to throw them up there and you're saying this movie is supposed to be, getting deeper into these sort of issues, then you actually have to interrogate the issues instead of just having them there, like acting gay or acting transvestite or acting black or acting Latino or whatever the fuck, right? Like, it's just a lot of the times is I'm really enjoying Nick Nolte's performance, I'm kind of enjoying some of the story elements, and then a lot of it's like, oh, that's I don't want to throw out the word cringe all the time, but it's very cringe.
There's a lot of cringe here. There's a lot of cringe here. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I feel like we're rightfully shitting on the stuff that deserves to be shit upon.
Mm-hmm.
But the film is also kind of doing something interesting here, in that there's no happy ending to this film. Like, we kind of think we get a happy ending when, like the racist dirty cop gets taken down, but ultimately it's like, nobody's going to do anything about this. Like, this is. And it does remind me. I think this would be a good double feature with LA Confidential in a weird way. Right?
There's a lot of same elements there. Yeah,
LA Confidential is kind of the good version of Q&A.
It is, yes. Because Nick Nolte's character in this is essentially
kind of Bud White from Russell Crowe's character from LA
pretty much, and it's very much the same kind of structure where it's like they bring the young. In the case of LA Confidential, they bring the young detective in and use him as a figurehead, and all that stuff to get arrests and good PR. They're doing the same thing of Timothy Hutton here as the assistant DA, whose father was a former cop who was killed in the line of duty. Like, actually,
a former cop who went to law school and became a DA, and that's again that's a whole thing that does not get interrogated in the slightest. But continue. Yeah.
I kind of wonder if someone just like, I don't know, maybe there might be some lawsuits. someone might want to call up with what's his name who wrote LA Confidential.
Curtis Hanson.
No, the writer of the book.
Elroy, James
Elroy. Yeah, someone might want to ask James Elroy. The guy who wrote the book on this, did he maybe rip you off? I don't know.
Well, the book, I think the book predates the Elroy novel.
Oh, well, Elroy, you fucking hack.
Yeah, you fucking hack James Elroy. But we're gonna get some. Sorry, I almost did I did the slur unironically, but I'm not going to do that, because the film definitely encourages you to, to want to come out and use the ethnic slurs in the
right
in the funny way, right? But,
I will say, like, even though I don't know if it was intentional in the actual text of the movie, there is one moment I found like really effective when it's like kind of interrogating sort of the sort of racist structure within the police. Like it actually kind of comments on the racism inherent in the crime syndicates too, because you see a little bit of that where, the Italians, we'll work with these, quote unquote spics or whatever, we'll do that, but they're not really Italians, they're not really us. They're good earners, but we can just eliminate them like that, even easier than we can eliminate our own people.
Right, and then at the end, it's like, anybody know any Chinese?
Yeah.
Like we're just gonna clear out one ethnic group and then like move on to the next, and just like got to do that ching ching chong talk for 6 months or whatever.
Yeah, but at the end scene there where Chappie, that's his name, right? Yeah, Charles S. Dutton's character Chappie, where he's the he's presented as the Blue Lives Matter guy, basically, because he's the black cop who is told to his face by Nolte's character that you're the whitest in that I know.
You're the whitest in that I ever knew.
Yeah, and Nolte has no problem gunning him down. Dutton seems to, like, his character seems to have the idea that Nolte has some sort of respect for him when he really doesn't at all. All Nolte knows is that he'll stay quiet. That's what he expects, kind of thing.
Well, and all of these people, and this is where we might. We're going to go here now. We're going to talk about real life. All of these characters like respect Nolte's, character. Brennan is the character's name. They respect Brennan as like the hero cop. He's always the first through the skylight, the first through the door. They say that in dialogue 2 or 3 times in the film, right? But they all know he's dirty. They all know he's like framing people. They all know, kind of all this shit. And so, like, what worth is it if you're willing to go into danger if ultimately the whole like thing that you're doing is just framing people? And the answer is, well, these are bad people. They were doing bad things. We know they're doing bad things. We can't prove it because there's some liberal judge out there, like preventing us from doing things. And so we got to kind of make the thing happen in order to do the thing. And it does, like, it is worth noting that this film was made in 1990, despite the fact that sort of the novel is from the 70s. And, but 1990 is sort of the tail end of the crack epidemic in New York City. You can't watch this film without, you can, because the film isn't really about that. But I think you can't understand this film without understanding like it's made in that context. There were some super high profile prosecutions of like super dirty cops a couple of years before this film was made. And in fact, there's a documentary called The 7-5, which is on Netflix, which talks about like how essentially there were like New York City cops who would go into their like certain like defined city blocks in New York City, and you could just go in and it was just crack epidemic, and they would just control whole neighborhoods. They were working with the dealers. They were skimming off the top. They were going in and just stealing money for themselves. This was like that era of policing, right? Yeah. The documentary is actually not good because it sort of makes this seem like a fun time. And in fact, a couple of the guys who were profiled in that documentary who were convicted of bribery, et cetera, ended up showing up on a white nationalist podcast that I follow in my other life.
Oh, go figure.
And now have a show on the network that is hosted by that. Talking about Law and Order and all that other bullshit. And so there is this kind of reality to that. The documentary is worth watching. At least like watch the first 30 minutes to kind of get the hang of it and kind of get the feel for it. There is this kind of real history here, and I think one of the other things that the film does, again, this kind of comes into like what's happening in first week of June 2020. Is that it focuses on like this sort of big picture conspiracy of like there are these like kind of group of people who all like know things about this kind of major political figure, and the whole thing is that Brennan is going out and like he's sort of the enforcer, like killing them. And the reality is that poor people who are passing a bad check or passing a counterfeit bill in order to get a pack of cigarettes get tortured and or killed on a regular basis by ordinary police action. And so like the heightening this to this happens because there's this vast conspiracy happening does elide the sort of the normality of this and sort of the real world. And I feel like that's something that it's very difficult for a film of this kind to really kind of explore, because it's always like, well, there's got to be kind of this big like drug dealer in Florida. We've got to kind of go down there and there's a yacht and we got to have like a big scene where the yacht gets burned and exploded. And it's like, no, the reality is this happens every day. It happens every fucking day in the United States. There's no question about it.
In the narrative, it's like always the majority of the cops are the good people, and it's always the one or two bad eggs. And, one of them has super power over the entire department. So that's why there's so much corruption.
Yeah.
It's not because there's a bunch of cops who know what's going on and are looking the other way, or, watching one of their comrades push a 75-year-old man into the street and have him bleed out his ear and walk right past him, like that. No, that doesn't happen. That doesn't happen every day.
It clearly doesn't happen. Yeah, no, that's not a thing. Well, that guy deserved it because he was,
because he had the nerve to like come up to a cop and ask him what the fuck he's doing, basically,
I mean, I saw the video, and then, you look at the original thread. Sorry, there's a particular Twitter thing that happened. There's a video, and I hope that Lee will link to this in the show notes just so the people down the line will get to see this. But I looked at like the comments on it, like from normies, and it's like, oh no, he was reaching. He thought he was reaching for his gun because he reached for his belt. It's like, no, he was gesturing vaguely. He's like miles away from the guy's belt. It's completely nonsensical. But that's the level of like, and this is why cop movies are bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've done a lot of cop movies. Cop movies are great. They're a lot of fun, but they are designed to tell a story about how cops are basically good, that there's this like kind of mass of people out there, the animals, the savages, who are just out to, kill people and rape and murder and steal, etc. And so you need like a hard man, a whole crew of hard men who are willing to do the dirty things in order to protect innocent society. And that's just not the case ultimately. It's just, sorry, I'm an SJW cuck or whatever, but
that's the biggest problem with this movie. It just, and I mean,
but this film does it better than like most films, right? Like, this ends up in like easily the top 10% of films of this kind, because it does display, the corruption kind of comes from the top. That the corruption comes because there's no political will to combat it ultimately. And when you have that in the film, and when you have like this guy is a beloved cop, this guy is somebody that the other cops are willing to protect, and that ultimately we don't get the happy ending, it does speak to there is a reality to this. There is a like it is exploring that in a real way. And the fact that even the like really good version of exploring these ideas is ultimately fundamentally inadequate in 100 ways. It just speaks to kind of the problem in our culture with like how much we fucking worship cops.
I mean, it's 1990, so you especially kind of expect it to be compromised to that level where it's like it can't blame all cops. It has to blame like two bad Irish cops for the whole problem, kind of thing.
The whole problem is Nick Nolte. Really wanted to just fuck men in the ass. Bring himself to it. And that's the real problem. And of course, there's the whole like gay panic kind of thing.
That's another whole problem.
Deeply under the surface, but like definitely there. We touched on it, but whatever.
But I do like that the ending is a downer, and that there's almost a bit of a third man ending here, where it's like he's trying to reconnect with the old girlfriend, and she's not having it. She's
we barely even touched on the girlfriend, who is apparently Sidney Lumet's daughter is the girl there, and I was definitely kind of looking to go like, this is the era of these kind of films in which like the girl always gets naked for 3 seconds, and apparently she doesn't, and I feel that's very good because it would make me feel really uncomfortable if he was looking at his daughter naked and etc.
Yeah, it's no Dario Argento stuff going on here. It's but yeah, I don't know. I think we kind of covered it without getting
I feel weird. I feel weird. There's so much more to the film, but it's not interesting. It's not. There's we could talk about the performances. Like there are some nice performances here.
Performances are, I think, across the board, they're pretty damn good. Like,
oh yeah.
I mean, Nolte, of course, is kind of the standout here, but
Nolte is amazing. Like really, this really is like watch this for Nick Nolte's performance. Like we were kind of like he does chew the scenery, but it's thoroughly entertaining and it's very like within. If everybody was pitched that level, this film would be a masterpiece. Ultimately,
I mean, he just with all the confidence in the world sticks his hand down the pants of a cross-dressing hooker and just to intimidate the hooker. Like he's one of the best screen villains I've seen in a long time. And I think that's one thing about this film. It is kind of really underseen. And on that alone, I would definitely recommend it.
People should see it. People should see it, definitely. I agree. I wasn't trying to counter-signal that idea. I was just saying, like, it's not great, but it is interesting, and it's kind of worth seeing in and of itself,
I mean, we watch a lot of movies on this podcast that are not great, but they are interesting. So yeah.
And this fits into that. Like I remembered it as being kind of better than it is ultimately, and I think that it was just kind of like forgetting all the test pattern material to it,
Right. But yeah, I don't really have any trivia for this so much. Like I already mentioned that Lumet put the Alan Smithy credit on there as far as like the television version. Because apparently he felt it was like the editing just compromised it way too much.
I can only imagine what like the TBS edit of like a film with this many racial slurs looks like.
Was this ever on TBS? Like,
I mean, it was that era in which like everything ended up on like the basic cable channels.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there's this movie is 2 hours and 12 minutes long. I'm sure there's an hour and 45-minute cut of this where they just cut all the slurs in the most awful way possible.
Oh, yeah.
And left in all the bullshit, and it's probably the most terrible edit. I feel like that we should do a side project of just seeking out like bad TV edits. And
this feels like a movie that would have ended up on A&E as a TV cut. Yeah, that's what that was good. It doesn't feel like TBS to me. TBS would have Tango and Cash and stuff like that, not this. Right. Yeah, and the only other thing, Nick Nolte gained 50 pounds for his roles, Brandon, on this, and he gained it fairly flattering. Like he doesn't look obese or overweight or slovenly or anything. He's just got a teeny bit of a gut, and mostly he's just big. Like he's intimidating as shit. Like
He's just kind of a big guy. He's just sort of, I'm a tough cop and I got some weight behind me. And, it is like that sort of thing of like, a lot of these like, cops would just kind of have the mass to, like look intimidating, so
yeah,
sure.
Yeah. So we decided we're going to change things up a bit. We're not going to do V.I. Warshawski.
And this is entirely like a thing that I said to Lee is like, I haven't seen V.I. Warshawski. It may be a perfectly fine movie, but I can't see doing a goofy, fun movie about cops, even though that's about a private investigator, which is a different thing. But the idea of trying to watch that and to treat it with any kind of respect at this point, given what's happening in the world, felt. I just couldn't bring myself to do it. So,
and you made a great suggestion. This is something we've wanted to do for a while. Anyway, we've talked about it back and forth.
This was on my initial list of films we were going to do 5 years ago when we first started doing this podcast. So, all that had to happen was worldwide insurrection against the cops.
So we're going to do
this film.
Yeah, so we're going to do Strange Days, which should be. I think that will also spark some interesting conversation considering current events. So,
1995.
The future is now.
The future is now. Yeah. We're gonna look to the near future dystopia of 1999. So this is a film that I'm just gonna swallow. This is a film that like really meant a lot to me when I was like 15 or 16 and saw it for the first time, and has a deep place in my heart. And I honestly can't tell if it's any good or not. So we'll see. We'll have a conversation about it next week. But it is one that I'm just too close to have any kind of like real critical response to. But we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah. But yeah, until then, Daniel, tell people where they can find you on the interwebs.
I'm on Twitter at Daniel E. Harper. You can follow me there if you choose to. Yelling about Joe Biden and shit. I also do a podcast called I Don't Speak German. It's because I don't speak German, but I do have a deep understanding of genocidal racists, and they get really mad at me when I talk about them on my podcast, which is called I Don't Speak German. So if you're interested in the goings-on about genocidal racists and the people who support them, you should check out my podcast, I Don't Speak German. And you can find that at idon'tspeakgerman.libsyn.com or on my Twitter at Daniel E. Harper, or Spotify, Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud. I don't know, lots of places.
Like honestly, you should probably know about that podcast now, considering how much is blown up compared to this podcast. Like, I would not be surprised if every new listener to this came here from there, kind of thing, somehow.
Yeah, that it is something that I kind of joke about a bit here and there. It's like, so I have two podcasts, one of which is a goofy, beery look at like fun movies where we just joke around for an hour and talk about things, and the other is like a deep dive into the worst ideology in human history.
Yeah.
And one of these is 100 times the size of the other.
Yeah.
And that's not the one that you think,
Yeah, but if you just want to find this nonsense that we do, you want to hear us talk about movies, or you want to hear me do a stupid little radio show where I just waste an hour of your time playing some film soundtracks and scores. We got a new show coming soon. I've done a new contract with our little resident Wolfman, Lee Van Teeth, who does our Halloween shows. He's now doing a monthly rock and roll show on the TMBDOS network, I guess is what it is. Whatever. But so that's coming soon too. But you can go to tmbdos.podbean.com, where you can find our Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Facebook links. Join the Facebook group, and you can find out what's coming up on the podcast. Interact with us, give us film suggestions, tell us how we're doing, tell us how bad we are, whatever you want to do. It's fine. We look forward to that. And until then, thank you, Daniel, and thank you everyone for listening. And we'll be back with Strange Days next time. Goodbye.
Cheers.
A metal shark cuts into the night, spilling the colors of the neon lights. Babo the hitman is driving with his crew. The baddest boys, all born and raised in Barrio True. They're looking for a man named Sweet Tyrone. In better days, he was a friend, but is no more. He broke the main rule that controls the street. You don't mess with the ones you love, the ones you need. barrio boys slowly walked and left the bar. They slapped some high fives and got inside the car. The girl came out and Papo paid her as agreed. Into the night they disappeared. The street had spoken. Don't double cross the ones you love. Don't double cross the ones you leave. 'Cause you never know. 'Cause no one can say when you meet a friend out on the street. Don't double cross the ones you love. Don't double cross the ones you need. 'Cause you never know. 'Cause no one can say when you need a friend out on the street. Don't double cross the ones you love.
Thank you for listening to They Must Be Destroyed on Sight. For further episodes, our Apple Podcasts, Facebook, and YouTube links, please go to tmbdos.podbean.com. Thank you. Drive through.